The Phillies were only 2 seasons out from winning their first World Series in the franchise's 97-year history, but much of the core of that championship team had moved on. The 1981 season had ended in a disaster, as most of the Phillies couldn't get their heads back in the game after a long layoff caused by the mid-season strike. The Phillies had only made the playoffs by virtue of their play in the first half of the season, and then they found themselves being bounced out of the first round of the playoffs by a Montreal Expos team that had come to play. And then came the mass exodus. Dallas Green, the manager of the 1980 championship team, took a job as the general manager with the Cubs, and in a series of trades, somehow convinced the Phillies front office to allow him to take a number of his favorite Phillies players with him. Keith Moreland, Dickie Knowles, Larry Bowa all made the trip west to join Green in Chicago. Bob Boone, who acted as the team representative with the Players Union, found his contract sold to the California Angels. Earlier in the 1981 season, Greg Luzinski had his contract sold to the Chicago White Sox. Lonnie Smith and Bake McBride had also made their exits from Philadelphia. The new-look Phillies remained a contender in the 1982 season, but they finished in second place, 3 games behind the eventual world champions, the St. Louis Cardinals. As the Phillies entered their centennial season of 1983, more drastic changes were about to come. But while the personnel changes in the offseason inspired many jokes at the Phillies' expense, the 1983 team would prove to be a tough competitor, hanging in there when many thought that the race was lost, enduring many highs and lows along the way, and bringing another pennant back to Philadelphia. Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball History. On this channel, we talk about the history of baseball from the A's to the Phillies to the 19th century. And sometimes we talk about contemporary baseball issues. So if you love baseball and if you love Philadelphia, stick around and subscribe to our channel. Our heroes. They were given a special place of honor in our cathedrals to glory. You too can honor your heroes of your youth. Just go to tpublic.com and look for Philadelphia baseball history. To say that the winter following the 1982 season was controversial would be something of an understatement. Bill Giles was in his second year as the president of the Phillies organization, and he stunned the fans with a series of transactions. He shipped popular second baseman Manny Trio, along with prospect Julio Franco, to Cleveland, along with 3 other players, to acquire Von Hayes, a player many baseball insiders believed had potential. The fans, however, reacted to the news with a mix of anger and shock. 5 players for one? How could the Phillies give up so much for one player who had hit a mere .250 in his rookie season with the Indians? Hayes would be tagged with the mocking nickname 5 for 1, a label that haunted him throughout his Phillies career. But Bill Giles was not finished. He now had a hole to fill at second base. At the same time, he wanted to shore up the bullpen with a strong closer. The closer, a consistent pitcher specializing in pitching in the 9th inning when the team had a slim lead, had only recently emerged as a necessary role in the team's pitching staff. Giles made a deal with the San Francisco Giants, sending the Phillies' number 2 starter, Mike Krukow, to the city by the bay in exchange for Joe Morgan and Al Holland. Holland was understandable. He was a hungry bullpen pitcher with a mean fastball and eager to take the mound for the late innings. But Joe Morgan was more of a gamble. Yes, he was a former two-time National League MVP, noted both for his offense and defense when he was at the top of his game with the Houston Astros and the Cincinnati Reds. But at age 39, his offensive performance had fallen off as of late. After slumping for a few seasons, Morgan had been recognized with an award no player wants to receive: the Comeback Player of the Year award. Could he return to old form and give the Phillies what they needed at second base on a daily basis? Morgan was reunited with his Big Red Machine teammate Pete Rose, who was 41 at the time. Almost immediately, the jokes came flying. Would the Phillies replace the clubhouse Gatorade with Geritol? Philadelphia Daily News columnist Bill Conlon joked that when Giles promised they would bring a dynasty to Philadelphia, he neglected to say that it was the Ming Dynasty. The jokes only intensified when in late January of 1983, the Phillies signed free agent Tony Perez, another former member of the Reds' World Championship team of the mid-70s. Was Giles trying to put together the Big Dead Machine? The nickname that stuck, and indeed was embraced by Giles, was the Wheeze Kids, a play off the Whiz Kids nickname given to the team of youngsters who in 1950 won the National League pennant. We'll be the Wheeze Kids in 1983 and 1984, Giles would say, and then the Whiz Kids in 1985, indicating his confidence that the Phillies farm system was on the verge of producing another batch of young Major League talent. Going into spring training, second-year manager Pat Corrales had a core of big-named and big-salaried veterans to lead his team. But he also had a number of young players the Phillies were high on to complement his veteran crew. Indeed, Bill Giles believed that his young players, like Von Hayes and Bob Dernier, would eventually edge out the veterans for starting roles. The Phillies entered the 1983 season with high expectations from their fan base, but spring training had not been kind to the Phillies crew. Von Hayes landed on the disabled list, although he was expected to return to the club by opening day. Likewise, Marty Bystrom, former pitcher of the month for September of 1980, would start off on the DL. Mike Schmidt, Gary Matthews, and Bo Diaz would all start the season with various aches and pains. It didn't help matters when the Phillies started the season with a 2-game series with the Mets at Shea Stadium. In a contest that set the tone for much of the 1983 season, Tom Seaver outpitched Steve Carlton in the season opener. The Phillies would be swept by their New York rivals. Things didn't improve when they rolled into San Francisco. By the time the Phillies reached the first weekend of the season, they had lost their first 3 games. Still, things picked up in April. By May 1st, the Phillies found themselves in a statistical tie with the Cardinals for first place. May, however, brought with it a team-wide hitting slump. The team as a whole struggled to get on base and score runs. The saving grace for the Phils was that the rest of the National League East was struggling as well. Although the Phillies lost 8 of their first 15 games in May, by May 23rd, they still had a share of first place. Nonetheless, the Phillies' offensive problems continued. In addition, their longtime ace, Steve Carlton, seemed to have lost a step or two at age 38. He was no longer racking up the wins. By early June, Giles had let it slip to the media that Corrales' head might be on the chopping block if the team didn't turn things around. This culminated in a contentious meeting on June 6th, involving Giles, Corrales, and Phillies general manager Paul Owens. It was a meeting that required Giles to make an announcement that Corrales was still his man. But the public relations damage had been done, as Corrales was largely seen as being on a death watch. The Phillies were not living up to the front office's expectations, but they were still playing well enough to remain in contention in a 4-team race. Despite lackluster performances from Mike Schmidt, Von Hayes, Gary Matthews, and Bo Diaz in the first half of the season, the Phillies entered the All-Star break just 1.5 games back from first place. At times, it seemed like no team wanted to step up and take control of the NL East race. In this situation, the Phillies would find themselves taking first place, only to lose it a game or two later. The front office grew impatient with this situation, blaming Corrales for the lack of performance of the Phillies' star players. Corrales believed Owens and Giles was not a good communicator, and therefore was failing to motivate his veteran players. So on July 18th, while the Phillies had a winning record of 43 wins to 42 losses and sole possession of first place, Giles filed Corrales. It was the first time in their history that the Phillies fired their manager in the middle of the season while the team was in first place. Giles decided to install his general manager, Paul Owens, in Corrales' place. This was not the first time that Paul Owens had served in this role. Owens took on the dual role of manager and general manager in 1972 in an effort to assess what talent he had on the team while the organization waited for its young talent to mature in the minor leagues. From his home in suburban New Jersey, Corrales expressed his opinion that the Phillies had the talent to win the pennant. He was confident that over the remaining months of the season, the veterans would get their collective acts together and play consistently when they needed to. He believed that Giles was just an inexperienced team president who pushed the panic button when the Phillies showed a glimmer of adversity. If there was any bright spot to the season, it was the Phillies' pitching. Although the success came from some unexpected sources. Charlie Hudson made his Major League debut on May 31st, and by August 8th had a record of 7 wins to 3 losses and an ERA of 3.28. Al Holland was busy defining the role of the closer and broke the Phillies' record for saves in a single season, which had been held jointly by Jim Constanti and Dick Selma. John Denny, who had been brought into the 1982 season as the Phillies' third closer, won 19 games, leading the National League, and posted an ERA of 2.37. Denny would win the 1983 Cy Young Award. And while Steve Carlton had a disappointing season, where he fell 1 game short of a .500 winning percentage, Lefty still notched his 300th career win towards the end of the season against his former team, the St. Louis Cardinals. In August, Mike Schmidt stepped up his game. He would end the season leading the majors in home runs with 40. But in early September, Schmidt publicly criticized the Phillies front office, claiming that the players had a hard time determining exactly who was acting as the field manager. Was Owens really calling the shots, or was he taking his cues directly from Bill Giles? Schmidt further charged that the inconsistency of the lineup from day to day was contributing to the inability of many players to get into a groove. But then, something happened in September. Phillies began to win, and to do so consistently. In the beginning of September, Joe Morgan had been hovering around the Mendoza line. It was a situation that prompted the Phillies to call up their promising young prospect, Juan Samuel, a little earlier than they had planned, in order to give Morgan some competition at the second base position. Morgan responded with an explosive offensive performance in the season's home stretch. Morgan began hitting more consistently, contributing to the Phillies' hot streak. Morgan celebrated his 40th birthday on September 19th with 4 hits, including 2 home runs and 4 RBIs. He followed that up with 4 hits on the 20th and 5 hits in a doubleheader on the 22nd against Montreal. Morgan would end the season with the second most home runs on the Phillies, 16, and the third most RBIs. When the Phillies seized sole possession of first place on September 18th, they wouldn't relinquish it for the rest of the season. The Phillies clinched the National League East on September 28th in Chicago, dealing a loss to former Philly Dick Ruthven, who had been traded to the Cubs earlier in the season for Willie Hernandez. The Phillies entered the NLCS with a chip on their collective shoulder. Their opponent was the Los Angeles Dodgers, the team that had dashed the hopes of the city of brotherly love in the 1977 and 1978 NLCS contests. The Phillies were out for revenge. Mike Schmidt set the tone early, hitting a first-inning home run in Game 1 in Los Angeles. The solo shot proved to be the game winner, as Steve Carlton stepped up his game and held the Dodgers scoreless for 7 2/3 innings. Al Holland then responded over the next inning and a half, holding the Dodgers scoreless and giving the Phils a 1-0 win. After losing the second game to Fernando Valenzuela, the Phillies blew the Dodgers away in Game 3 and Game 4, behind excellent pitching performances by Charlie Hudson and Steve Carlton. Mike Schmidt, Pete Rose, Gary Matthews, Gary Maddox, and even Sixto Lezcano all contributed to the Phillies' offensive onslaught. Matthews had knocked out 3 home runs in the series while driving in 8 runs to be named the NLCS MVP. In their centennial season, the Phillies had delivered as promised, bringing another pennant back to Philadelphia. And now they had a chance to capture their second World Championship. But in the World Series, this team of seasoned veterans that had managed to get hot just at the right time in the season cooled off. This was due in part to the incredible pitching of the American League champions, the Baltimore Orioles. Mike Boddicker, Scott McGregor, Sammy Stewart, Jim Palmer, and the rest of the O's staff kept the Phillies to a mere .195 team batting average in the World Series. Only Joe Morgan, Gary Matthews, and Gary Maddox managed to hit with any consistency in the series. Morgan and Maddox both hit solo home runs in Game 1, giving the Phillies their only win in the series. The nail in the coffin came in the second inning of Game 5, when Charlie Hudson gave up a solo shot deep the right field to the Orioles' Eddie Murray. The Orioles would win Game 5 5-0, taking the series 4-1. After the series, Orioles pitching coach Ray Miller stated that while the Orioles respected the Phillies' talent, the Phillies' stars had come off as being quite pompous, failing to take the Orioles seriously until it was too late. Which brings us to the big picture of the 1983 season. The Phillies managed to give their fans something to cheer about in their centennial season. This was particularly true near the end of the season, when the team of grizzled veterans managed to get hot just at the right time in the season. But by putting together a team of superstars, 4 of whom would wind up in the Hall of Fame, and 1 who ought to be in the Hall if not for his own reckless behavior, did Bill Giles simply put together a team of egos who failed to play as a team when it mattered the most. I hope you enjoyed this look back at the Phil's 1983 season. If you did, give us a thumbs up. Tell your friends about us, and let us know in the comments what topics you would like to see in future videos. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you have any ideas for topics that we can cover in the future, please let us know in the comments below. If you would like to see more of these videos, please consider becoming a patron through Patreon. Again, we'll have a link in the description box below.